Hey, George, you've given us a bolter, Cooper Connolly. Tell us a bit about the thoughts around that selection.
Yeah, it's exciting. We haven't had that many bolters for a little while, so yeah, he's an exciting young talent. Limited. It hasn't played a great many games of cricket yet, but we really like his versatility. His work through the middle order, I think, for the Scorchers has been really impressive. Handy left arm spin as well, which is just as a secondary skill, is something we're really keen to keep exploring and see where that goes with his cricket. He's obviously had some leadership capabilities in the past, leading the Australian under-19 team a couple of years ago. We like his cricket, not only in white ball cricket but just across the board. We've had him on an MRF trip in the past to India to explore playing in some different conditions as well. So really excited about having him on the tour and hopefully getting some opportunities.
Yes. Well, great stuff there from George Bailey talking about their audacious selection of young Cooper Connolly for the upcoming white ball tour of the UK. He's just played one first-class game and he's got an Australian call-up. You are listening to Cricket Unfiltered. I am Menners, and I'm joined by sports broadcaster Damien Watson. Damien, how are you? How's your winter week been down in Melbourne?
Very sick, unfortunately, Metters. Hence why we've had to delay this podcast by 24 hours. So apologies for that. I tell you what, though, I envy the panoramic backgrounds that you had of George Bailey. I know for those listening, they wouldn't understand, but when he was on the Zoom link there, gee, it was a postcard type image behind him.
Yeah, I think that's his regular office in Tasmania. Got a beautiful view down there. And we'll be talking about Tasmania later on because they've got a bold initiative to stage some indoor test cricket, which I'm very excited about. We'll also talk about all bits of cricket news from all around the world. But for this episode, we're going to start with that squad that was announced to go to the UK. That goes late August. And a few features from the squad. I mentioned Cooper Connolly, but first off, Pat Cummins will skip the tour. And there was a little bit of back and forth with the journalists about this in that press conference where a couple of people asked, would you prefer Cummins to be playing in the Australian team rather than, say, playing Major League Cricket now? But George Bailey was at pains to explain that Cummins is not really being rested from this tour. It's just a good opportunity for him to build up his fitness ahead of the test summer. I'm not really buying that, Damien. I think he's just skipping a meaningless tour.
There's probably an element of truth on either side, isn't there? Like, you can understand him. I can understand him taking it off because you're right. There's not a heck of a lot of meaning behind this tour. It's not like you're building up. I reckon there'd be more meaning for a T20 international series or a one-day series if it was built up towards the Ashes in this instance. I don't know why. It's sort of in the middle of nowhere really, and it's in the build up to footy finals as well from an Australian point of view. And I know the English Premier League will be starting around that time as well. So I think it'll get lost in the wash a little bit, hence the lack of significance. And look, he is getting older, Pat Cummins, so I can understand why they want to try and manage his minutes. And yeah, I can see your point too. There's not a heck of a lot of meaning behind this series, in my view.
Yeah, I'm not going to buy the stuff though that he's. I'm sure he's going to be working on his fitness, but I think he's just skipping the tour. And you're right, it's at an odd time. And why should Pat Cummins go over there, or any of the Aussies really? They're just going to cop it from the English fans. There's nothing on the line. It's just an excuse for the ECB to fill out a few cricket venues and sell a few pints. In saying that, though, they've picked a young squad, and I think there is some value for this Australian team after a disappointing T20 World Cup campaign. The 50-over side is in a slight period of transition. So I think it is a good opportunity. And I mentioned Cooper Connolly, but Mitch Marsh will skip both teams. And I think at times during the T20 World Cup, he did display a lack of inexperience, and it seemed like the pressure was getting to him at times. He dropped that catch in the Indian game that he would never have dropped. So I think this is a good opportunity for him to play in, although it's meaningless in a broader context, as I said, I think that the atmosphere after Johnny Best, though, is still going to be pretty hostile.
Yeah, true. And there's always a nature of rivalry between Australia and England, but it'll be a good chance, I suppose, to own skills for a lot of these players. I like the inclusion of Xavier Bartlett in there. He's one that's been playing his trade for quite a while, even at first class level. Good fast bowler.
He took those pair of 4-wicket hauls when he made his debut. Was it last summer? So he's shown some great promise. And speaking to players in the Shield scene, they really rate him.
Well, I remember when he first started, he first came onto the scene around the time of COVID, and he knocked over Tim Payne twice in a Shield match. Knocked him all in.
No great shakes.
But having said that, like, this was around the time Tim Payne was still around the scene, and just beat him all ends up on a couple of occasions in one match. So it's good to see him get rewarded. I like Aaron Hardy in there, as we know. Good developing all-rounder, came through the under-19s pathway. I really like his capacity as an all-rounder as well. So looking forward to what he can produce too. So those are the two players that I'm honing in on as ones to watch. You mentioned Cooper Connolly. Good opportunity for him, despite the lack of experience. I suppose it bodes well maybe for players that are playing in the Big Bash if they can make an impact.
Just on Cooper. Yeah, absolutely. And on Cooper Connolly, an extraordinary rise for him. And he's just got that air of someone that can rise to the big occasion. He had that famous innings in the Big Bash final 2 years ago where he and Hobson smashed the Scorchers to victory. Then he got a late call up to the Sheffield Shield final in the most recent summer and came out when the game was pretty comfortably in WA's laps, but still smashed a 90 on debut. And he was the former Australian under-19 captain at the 2022 World Cup. So he's just got that air of somebody that rises to the big occasion. And George Bailey said it there at the top of the show. He's a very versatile player, middle-order batter, left-arm spinner, and Australia doesn't have a lot of them.
And he's got that charisma about him, doesn't he, as well? He's a type of player with that X factor who you can sense can develop into a bit of a cult hero with the hair and just the swagger about him. You got to talk the talk as well as walk the walk, as they obviously say, but he's got a lot of capacity to be a bit of a cult hero. We like characters, don't we, Metters? Sometimes, when you look at the bigger picture with cricket, with more challenges than ever in regards to competition with other sports, yes, obviously performance has got to be the number one critical factor when it comes to selection, but I can understand why you look, and it's probably been a bit of a criticism maybe with the way the women's team's been selected and that they don't look at enough characters because they're all so many good players. But I don't mind bringing a character in because that's who the public fall in love with. And if they're consistent enough and they're on par with someone who maybe doesn't have the same charisma, well, you pick the player with a bit of charisma about them because that's what draws people in.
And I like this gutsy pick. It's a good opportunity to see what he's got at the top level. A few other things from George Bailey's press conference. Jake Fraser-McGurk is back into the team. He'll be in both squads, so I think you'll see him slip into David Warner's spot. And George Bailey drew a definitive line through David Warner's career. There was some speculation that he might attempt to play at the Champions Trophy in Pakistan next year. Well, George Bailey has said, no, he's finished, and congratulations on a great career. And I actually think that was the best thing Bailey could have done, Damien, because you do not want this speculation hanging over the team for the next 6 months heading into that Champions Trophy. Warner's done, move on. And even if George Bailey is thinking at the back of his mind, if we're really struggling at the top of the order, we could always call him up again, which he might be thinking, but don't say it, just say it's done.
Yeah, I think you want to apply that confidence, and it's a good message to the squad, isn't it? The selector has confidence within them. You're not necessarily drawing up and referring to older players. We had that same debate, remember, when Shane Warne was considering a comeback before the 2009 Ashes series. Remember, there was that same sort of discussion. I think he should have. Yeah, probably should have. He was still in good form in the IPL, as we know, around that time. But I think it sends a good message to the younger players that the selectors have faith in them. They're willing to give them time. At the end of the day, it's the Champions Trophy, Menners. So, it seems like the World Cup was a good fitting stage for him to end on an international scale. And Champions Trophy doesn't have the same significance to it. So,
I agree.
Yeah.
And his form was sliding at the end there. So I think it's a good time for him to go out. Another old stager appears to be finished at international level. Matthew Wade has not been picked in the squad. Josh Inglis will be the number one keeper for both T20 and ODI cricket moving forward. But Alex Carey is going on the tour as Inglis's understudy for the one-day international leg of the tour. And I'm really looking forward to now Inglis getting an extended run in the white ball teams. He's been in and out of the T20 side because of Wade. And he won the battle with Carey for the spot in the 50 over side. So, I think this is going to be really exciting to see what he can do.
Yeah, it allows that level of consistency. We know he's a good power hitter. Where do you think that leaves Alex Carey now, Menners?
I think he's the test keeper, and that's it. Understudy in the one-day side. And if Inglis doesn't grab his opportunity in the white ball teams, Carey's probably there waiting to jump in there. But I think Inglis has showed enough in the opportunities he's got to be considered our premier white ball wicket keeper. And Alex Carey played that superb innings. What was he, 98 not out in his last test match as he steered Australia to a famous victory against New Zealand. So he's certainly our test keeper. A wonderful player, executed that fantastic run out of Johnny Bairstow, as we all know. So he's a hero. I mean, he should be bronzed.
Well, it's sort of similar in the way it was a little bit different, the circumstances where Ian Healy was under enormous pressure in the late 90s and basically got axed, didn't he, from the one-day team in around that late 97 period, and that left Gilchrist to go in. But it's good to have that smoother transition. The fact that Carey's still around, he's part of the squad, I think that's good as well, to have that level of trust between the two as well, and to be around each other. I think that's a good thing too.
Agree. Other notable inclusions, Spencer Johnson's in the T20 squad, and Josh Hazlewood will be on tour. So he's playing in winter. Mitchell Stark is actually going on the one-day side of things, but missing the T20 stuff. Now, so that's it for the squad. You mentioned the Champions Trophy, or we were talking about it before. There's been big news since our last podcast. The Champions Trophy was set to be held in Pakistan, but it's been confirmed now India will not travel to Pakistan and play there. So they have to revamp the whole schedule, and India will likely play their games in a neutral venue nearby in the subcontinent somewhere. So that's a huge developing story for the Champions Trophy. And I guess the big thing there is obviously Pakistan and India are due to play in Pakistan. Will Pakistan still play that game? Will they leave Pakistan and go and play India overseas when they're supposed to be hosting the tournament? So, as we've discussed many times in this podcast, India's power reigns supreme, and they were not going to go to Pakistan. They have genuine security concerns, so I guess it's a little bit more complicated for them to travel to Pakistan than other nations, but still the Champions Trophy now will be split over two countries. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I was just thinking, Menners, pondering that ultimately maybe they should set aside 2 weeks for both teams to make a trip to Australia and then come back.
That would be good. They could come play at the MCG. But what if India makes the final? Will that mean it'll be played outside of Pakistan? It does throw a little bit of a spanner in the works.
Yeah, well, they would have to, wouldn't they? I mean, if they refuse to go, it just creates a disastrous situation if they do reach the final. Surely they would have to have some mitigating plans in place in the instance that is the case, because at the end of the day, you're right about the power of India, and if the team isn't going to come, well, you don't have a final, do you? So
you're right.
The behest of the team.
Indeed. All right. So in the last week, the Big Bash schedule for next summer has been announced, and it's a 44-game season that runs from December 15 to January 27, and like in the old days when the Big Bash started, it's uninterrupted cricket every night except for December 24 and 25. So I guess firstly, the date of the tournament, it starts a little bit later than it did last year. It finishes on January 27, so the day after Australia Day. That's when the final is being played, so it misses the Australian Open tennis.
Yeah,
I like that length of season, Damien. We've discussed before, but that does give, that's in the school holidays, and it gives opportunities for players to come and play from overseas.
Well, we've seen a little bit of a mini renaissance, shall we say, of the Big Bash and bringing crowds in. And it's worked, hasn't it, over the last probably 2 seasons. It's probably fair to say during COVID it really struggled, and just out of COVID as well. So we've seen a bit of a renaissance in the competition and the interest. It's interesting. It probably tends to peak around that, from what I can gather. This is just a hunch, and the statistics probably back it up as well. Probably once the school holidays set in, maybe even after Christmas. Everyone's sort of in a cricketing mood around that Boxing Day period, and that's when people start to really turn up to the matches. There's still a little bit of a lull, I reckon, at the start of the season. So it'll be interesting to see whether that's the case again for this upcoming season. And yeah, I think they've got the length right. What are your thoughts, Menners, in regards to having a match on Christmas Day? We've seen the NBL make the move. They've been the first code to make the move to have sport on Christmas Day. It was a large success. Obviously, they had the window to themselves. Do you think we'll eventually move that way with the Big Bash, or is it sacrosanct, do you think, to not have any cricket on Christmas Day?
I have been campaigning for Christmas Day cricket for probably going on 10 years now. I think it's a huge miss by Cricket Australia. This is where the Australian Cricketers Association can sometimes be its own worst enemy, because they try to protect these things like Christmas Day, when in fact, if you're playing in the Big Bash, Christmas Day is not really a holiday anyway. You're either traveling to a game in the next day or two. You've played a game leading up to Christmas. So it's not like the cricketers get a whole proper Christmas holiday anyway. And Damien, I think it's an opportunity that's being squandered. You mentioned the NBL, the National Basketball League. They played some games and they were very, very successful on Christmas Day. I think it was one game. And I think this is just such a huge miss by the cricketers, by Cricket Australia. They would have a captured market. It would become an event. Everyone would be at home watching the Christmas Day Big Bash game, and it would really help elevate a game that, it's not that it's struggling, but it's a very competitive landscape in Australia. So if you've got a way of promoting yourself and there's a sort of almost a full toss ready to smash, you got to take it.
I think we're at a stage now, it doesn't really bother me here nor there, but we are at a stage now, I think, where the public would embrace it, whereas maybe 20 years ago they wouldn't have. It would be, I think, a few detractors, there's no doubt. We've seen that with other sports when they obviously play on Good Friday, and it was a big move even to have sports played on Good Friday because of the solemn, that was an even more solemn nature holiday, isn't it, from a religious point of view compared to Christmas Day. But now we sort of accept it as a given, don't we? We don't really think twice about sport on Good Friday nowadays. The NRL obviously have had that tradition for a while now. So I do think once the Band-Aid's ripped off, it probably will happen, I reckon, soon. Not necessarily in the next couple of years, but in the...
I'll be honest, I'm surprised it hasn't happened by now. I'm shocked. I thought we would be there by now. I thought, especially my campaigning,
from a religious sensitivity point of view, but I think the general public would accept it. And we saw it with the NBL. Did we see much of a pushback there from groups of the mass public? No, we didn't, did we? And I think for people now, I mean, they have their mass and their a lot of people have their. I know people do go to mass in the evening as well on Christmas Day, but the majority go in the morning. They have their Christmas lunch. By the time you get to around 3 p.m. Christmas Day, most people get bored, don't they? They're sick of spending time with the family.
Especially
They're
me.
full. They want something to do.
No, I'm very disappointed that they haven't taken that opportunity again. And it's interesting, Cricket Australia, who preach inclusivity and diversity and embracing all cultures and religions, you'd think they'd be forward-thinking enough not to be tied to sort of antiquated Christian holidays. I mean, they don't, take holidays for Jewish holidays, for Muslim holidays. So, why is a Christian holiday more important than those?
it's part of the cultural element of Australia. That's the thing.
I think that's
entrenched
like
for a long time in the Western world. Christmas Day, you know that.
It's 2024. So no Christmas Day cricket. So Damien will be forced to suffer through our families and smile and nod at the continual boring stories.
Day, Menace?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I watch cricket replays, prepare for the Boxing Day test, studying the media guide.
There's nothing wrong with having a day with the family, unless you hate your family, of course.
I prefer if there was Big Bash on. All right, now, so with the schedule, so 44 game season finishes day after Australia Day. That's good because we've seen when it just spills over into February, the interest in the cricket can die out a bit as kids go back to school. They are going to play a game in Geelong, so listeners might remember last summer the game was called off in Geelong.
Yep.
And they're going to give it another go this year, so that's good. I don't know, Damien, as you know, I'm not from Melbourne. Is it worth persisting with Geelong?
Yes, because it's a growing area. It's one of the fastest growing areas, a bit like Newcastle in New South Wales, Menners, which, as you know, is a big growth area at the moment. A lot of people are moving up from Sydney, where the cost of living is too high, and they're going to Newcastle. Geelong has a similar growing metropolis about it. A lot of families are there. I think it is worth persisting. Then you've got that stadium that the state government has spent a lot of money on because there's a marginal seat down there, Menace. So they spend a lot of money on that stadium down there at GMHBA Stadium. So you may as well make use of it. And I think that's probably part of the reason why they do have a fixture there. State government's put a lot of money into it, Menace. So you've got to take full maximisation from it.
Agree, but they better get it right this summer because I don't think they'll be going back if they call off another game.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take our first break on Cricket Unfiltered, and then we'll be back to talking about the availability of the Australian. And we're here wrapping up all the cricket news. And we're going through the Big Bash schedule. And one big difference with the broadcast this year, Damien, is that all games that are on Channel 7 will be broadcast digitally on their app. Before that, you had to have a KO subscription. So hopefully that's good for young kids. I mean, my kids don't watch TV. They're always on their phones or their iPads. So hopefully having the Big Bash free on 7 Plus will actually, help people. And considering, people, I think are pretty familiar with 7 Plus because of the amount of big fixtures they've had with the Matildas and the Olympics. I think it actually could help.
I think it'd be good if they were to add certain features as well to the coverage. If they wanted to make it a separate product or, a premium product, remember what they used to do? I know they used to do this with the football coverage and even with the cricket coverage. If I remember, Ben, about 20 years ago, they used to have an active channel where you press the red button sometimes and you'd have different camera angles and things like that. You probably have that at your disposal if you're Channel 7. Why not utilise that and have stats on the side with the screen there? I think that'd be a good point of difference that you could use with 7 Plus if possible. I know for a lot of people, they used to love that when you press the red button and there'd be an active option with sport. So I think that'd be good. But obviously the key element of streaming is it's on demand, Menas. So, yeah, I think these days that's what the younger generation are doing. Look, I still think, obviously, most people, the vast majority, would still watch it as it happens on free-to-air. It's one of the last bastions of free-to-air TV and people watching it, right? So, sport in general. So, yeah, I think it'll be good. I'm interested, just as a bit of a side note. I'm keen to give it a go with the Olympics because we're in a situation. I did this with the Commonwealth Games as well when they were on 7. They're obviously on 9, the Olympics this year. Going to watch the different sports instead of just being tied to what's being shown on the main channel.
It's a good idea. And I think KO does that where you can pick different angles on the cricket. So that's with the coverage. I guess, always a talking point is the availability of the Australian players for the Big Bash. And that's where the tournament has been struggling in the last few years. So if the Sydney Test finishes on January 7, then you'd imagine the players January 8, January 9, probably out. So by January 10, you might get some of the test players filtering back to the Big Bash. But then they're due to leave on a test tour on the same day as the Big Bash final around January 27. And so therefore they'd probably take 4 or 5 days off in the lead up to that tour, have a bit of a break at the bare minimum. Even Marnus would probably do that. They'd probably make him take a break. So you're sort of looking at maximum sort of 2 weeks where you might get some of the Australian test players available. Of course, a lot will opt to rest. You can imagine the fast bowlers, maybe Nathan Lyon after a big summer. Even some of the batters might decide to have a rest. I mean, this series against India is going to be intense. There could be long test matches.
Yep.
So I'm not too hopeful that we'll get many Australian stars in the Big Bash, maybe some white ball players. And then there's obviously the problem we had last year of international players leaving early to go and play in other leagues. I don't think that problem's been solved. I think it's going to be okay. There'll be a few players that hang around. But yeah, I just think it's the reality of the Big Bash.
Do you think we'll ever really have a resolution to the problem, Menace? I mean, I've heard Rick Finlay, the statistician from the ABC, mention this in recent weeks on Twitter, where he said that the one possible solution, if there's no other competing priority, was to have the Big Bash in October and November. The problem you have there, though, is you're in a period of time where it's not school holidays and you're off the back of the footy finals. I'm not sure if it would garner the same sort of attention as it would in the middle of the summer. But as you know, in the middle of the summer, there's other competing priorities there as well. So given how jam-packed the window is, it's not like England, where you sort of have a bit of a window to yourself. I don't know if you can ever really have a broad-based solution to this.
No, not at all. And it would probably only happen if Australia itself made the time. So if we said, okay, well, we're going to move the Boxing Day and the Sydney Test, and we're going to play the Big Bash from the 20th of December to the 20th of January, and all our players are going to be involved, and that's it. But that would be no, I don't think so either. All right, so that's it for the Big Bash schedule. Some good news, though. Chris Lynn will be available for the whole Big Bash for the Adelaide Strikers. His contract in the ILT20 has not been renewed, so the Big Bash gets an ILT20 reject. And staying on with T20 cricket, Ricky Ponting has been sacked as Delhi Daredevils coach. I was surprised at this, Damien, because he's such a legend. The Delhi Capitals. What was I calling them? Their old name was the Daredevils. The Delhi Capitals were really good when he took over for a few years, but then they've slipped in recent years. But I think he's such a good coach. I would have backed him. I would have just backed him in there to get it right. I think they won half their games last IPL. It's
the reality
savage.
Is, yeah, it is savage. But the reality is, though, man, is they probably don't hold him in the same reverence in India as much as they do revere him. Probably not in the same reverence as we do here. So maybe that plays a part as well. And it is a ruthless industry, so I'm not as surprised. But yeah, I mean, we know about the way he speaks, the way he communicates. I don't know what his man management skills are like in that sense. So as a captain, he
apparently very good.
Plaudits. Yeah, exactly. There were a lot of plaudits coming from the players that played under him. So you'd imagine it'd be similar as a coach. So yeah, it was a surprise in that sense. But given the ruthless nature of the game, these things happen.
Yeah, definitely. Coaching is a cutthroat job to have. I guess there has been some speculation that perhaps he could now be seen helping the Australian T20 side. And if ever Australia was going to look to maybe split formats, maybe Ricky Ponting is someone you could bring in to help with the T20 side. But the way I see it is you'd split the formats. You'd have a test coach and a white ball coach. So I don't think it'd really work one coach doing the T20 side. So you probably want to have him as your white ball coach, a bit like Matthew Mott is for England.
Yeah, I see what you mean there. I think the media commitments have to come into consideration as well. You got to remember that too, particularly when the Australian summer comes around. So, yeah, it's a possibility. But outside of the World Cup, we are having this discussion, T20 internationals, is there going to be enough of a pull? I suppose there's that pull towards his country and coaching the national team. And I think that sentimental attachment will always be there. But, unless the big money comes in, you do wonder whether there's going to be enough to entice him to do that.
It's true. I've been watching him coach the Washington Freedom at the moment in the MLC, and Steve Smith's the skipper there. And it's interesting seeing Smith and Ponting working closely together. It's almost like an alternate universe if like Sandpapergate hadn't happened and Smith had continued as skipper and Ponting might have ended up in the coaching setup. All right. We'll head to England for this one. Jimmy Anderson is finished. I think we've managed to pay enough of a glowing tribute to him in past episodes. Damien, I think we've dedicated way too much time at the end of his career. He finished on 704 test wickets. He had the opportunity to take the last wicket of the test match at Lords, but he dropped a caught and bowled. And in the end, Gus Atkinson, who took 12 wickets in that game, took the final wicket. But it was a great finish for Jimmy. His team was dominant. They finished on the third morning, so plenty of time for him to celebrate with the lads. But Jeff Lemon, noted cricket writer, has put out a tweet, which I kind of agree with, that it's very strange that McCullum and Stokes are forcing Anderson into retirement when he's just 4 wickets behind Shane Warne's number of test wickets. And Lemon makes the point that if Anderson overtook Warne and became the second highest wicket taker in test cricket, that is a hugely significant moment. And that it is a little bit weird that McCullum and Stokes have said, nah, line through the sand. Like, would it really matter if he played a test or two more to the Ashes in 2 years? Probably not. And I love Jeff, and I kind of agree with him.
Well, you usually see with these situations that you bow out at the end of a series, don't you? I don't see what the difference was. Maybe the romance of Lords and everything like that. We saw the family ring the bell, etc. Maybe that played a part.
He was told to go.
Yeah, I know. But just in terms of maybe that was part of the decision-making, I don't know. But, yeah, usually, given that situation as well, usually you wait to the end of a series, don't you? That way it creates stability for the series.
I mean, I'm glad.
Did he? So, I just didn't see the reason why. I suppose maybe there was the intention to get rid of him earlier and they thought, we want to give him a farewell test. Simple as that.
I mean, I'm glad because I want Warne's record to be protected, but I don't think Stokes and McCullum would have done it for that reason.
No.
That's for sure.
Definitely not.
No, definitely not. Well, Jimmy's finished and he can go off now into the sunset and relax and do more of his podcasts. You know which one always irked me with declarations? Do you remember Warner's 335 against Pakistan, not out?
Yes.
I was livid Tim Payne did not allow Warner have a crack at the highest test score record. And in the end, we won the match with like 4 sessions to spare. And Payne potentially cost Australia a world record. And those records really mean something. Like, I'll never forget when Lara scored that 400. I'll never forget when he went past Sober's 364. I mean, they are, so important to the history of cricket. And I think captains sometimes forget that.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Mark Taylor, that was a different situation because he made the call on himself, didn't he, in 1998, famously, when he scored. Was it the 334 not out from memory against Pakistan in 1998? Different scenario as well. That was a bit of a bat-a-thon, wasn't it, But, yeah, it was a little bit of an odd one when you look back. It's funny. I still remember, I think I was hosting Radio Talkback after that day's play at the Adelaide Oval. And it was still all these text messages were coming in saying, we hate Warner, we hate this. Like, no one cared about the achievement. There was still that backlash after Sandpapergate at the time. So that's something that, does come into the memory. But, yeah, and against Pakistan as well. And even, look, Matthew Hayden's 380 was against Zimbabwe, but I still remember that as clear as day. So you're right about the historical poignancy of it.
I'll never forget Matthew Hayden's 380 because I was watching it and turned around and my kitchen was on fire. What? So I had to call the fire department. So I missed some of the innings. anyway.
Focused too much on the cricket, you left the stove on or something, did you?
It wasn't me, actually. It was somebody else who I shall not name who was the culprit. No. But I almost lost my house because you're right, though. I was really focused on the cricket. I wasn't paying attention. And then I look over and place is about to go up.
Jeez.
Yeah, it wasn't just Matthew Hayden's bat on fire that day. All right, now staying with some local news before we wrap it all up for this week. I have been saying for a long time that I think cricket needs an indoor venue, and in Tasmania they're building a new stadium at Macquarie Point for the AFL team, but they're actually going to make it, it's going to be built for cricket as well, and they're going to put a roof on it, so you could actually play indoor test matches down at Macquarie Point. I think that would be fantastic.
Oh, absolutely, it would be. We've seen it. We have seen it before in limited overs. Remember, Australia played South Africa when Docklands first opened. Did a 3-match series, and that had a negative effect on the footy as well, because that was played in the middle of August, and there was a footy final the next week, and the surface was so slippery because they were catering for the cricket that it didn't quite work out well. But I think it'll be a great boon. It'll be a point of difference as well. It's been a big point of consternation in Tasmania, as you know, and they had their state election late last year, but I like the idea, and I'm not trying to discount the significance of healthcare and the cost of living. We know that's an issue everywhere around the country, but stadiums and investment, we've seen what it's done to Adelaide. I think it's really revitalised the city of Adelaide with the redevelopment of the Adelaide Oval there over the last 10 years. I think the city's been revitalised because it gives people an excuse to go there. Perth is a little bit different because you got the mining, etc. But, it's a great stadium to go to. Look, a lot of people do go to Tasmania. It's a great natural tourist destination, but it's about investment. It gives sports fans an excuse to go down there, and it invests money into the economy, injects money into the economy. So I'm supportive of it.
Perhaps that we get, this dream of playing an indoor test match in summer sometime in Tasmania. So I've always said that the ultimate dream for me is an all-year cricket-only indoor stadium in Australia, so we could effectively host Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and play test matches in the off-season and play them indoors somewhere. But this is the first step. And I think it'll be good for Tasmania to have a really compelling case to try and get a test match there. We saw them steal the test match off Perth a couple of Ashes ago during COVID. So this will be another opportunity for them to put the pressure on venues, say like the Gabba, that might fall behind. If they can produce this state-of-the-art indoor venue, it'll become an event. As you say, people will travel to it. And, the great thing about going to, say, an indoor test match is ain't going to be weather affected, Damien. So you're going to get all the cricket. It's not like, traveling to Sydney on getting rained out.
It's amazing, isn't it, when you think about the way stadiums are built now, and I suppose also the fact that we've advanced so much infrastructure-wise that even after all these years, there aren't more stadiums with roofs built over them in the cricketing world. We see it with tennis.
Money. Yeah, it's just
we see it with tennis. I suppose with tennis, it's a bit more compact, isn't it? The stadiums compared to cricket.
You see it in America a lot. In Colum, obviously there's billions of dollars in NFL, but it's quite common to have roofs on stadiums over there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for all the cricket news for this week. Let's wrap it up with Can't Let It Go. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to Josh Inglis, who's the white ball keeper. Damien, what have you got for me?
Yeah, one thing to note, I noticed while we're on the subject of fixturing, in the women's, New Zealand are going to host Australia twice this summer. That's an interesting one. It is going to make it interesting for the Australian women's team because they're going to have a T20 World Cup. Then a lot of the players are going to have to come back to the Big Bash. They've got a series against India coming up, but they've got to fit in 3 one-dayers against New Zealand just before Christmas. And then they've got to rush back effectively for some fixtures here. And then later in the summer, they go back to New Zealand again for 3 T20s. So it's just going to show you how much of a compact summer it's going to be for the women's team. I suppose it's a good thing in a way, but it's a complete extremity on the other side compared to maybe the last couple of summers where there hasn't been a heck of a lot of fixtures for the Aussie women's team. Maybe 2 summers ago in particular, there wasn't a heck of a lot around.
No, that's interesting. A double stop in New Zealand. I guess what I'm really excited about is it's the women's Ashes this summer. They've actually split the men's and women's Ashes. So we'll have the women's Ashes this summer and then the men's Ashes the summer after. And the women's Ashes last year in the UK was very hotly contested and ended level on points. So England will come here with a point to prove. I've got a couple of quick can't let it goes. Well, the first one is I mentioned it before. I've been watching a lot of Major League Cricket, and Washington Freedom are top of the table. So that's the Ricky Ponting, Steve Smith-led team. And if you do have an Amazon Prime subscription, it's been actually riveting cricket. But something caught my attention, Damien, and you will remember, this is my can't let it go. During the T20 World Cup when they were playing in New York, everyone was saying, how expensive this must be. Has it been worth it? Well, news has come to light on Cricinfo that just before the tournament, the organising body that set up the New York Stadium asked for another $20 million in funding because they were running short of cash. So the costs for that New York leg blew out, and it looks like from the estimates, around 60 or 70 million dollars was spent on staging those games in New York. And some of the directors of the ICC are asking for a please explain. And I can see why, Damien.
We've heard that before, haven't we? With Commonwealth Games proposals and Olympics proposals, everything blows out cost-wise, doesn't it, Menners? That's why you always got to expect things to go over budget, don't you?
I still think it worked. I think going to New York did turn a few heads. I think you notice, I don't want to criticize the MLC because I like it, but there's a big difference, playing in Morrisville and playing outside of New York. It's just a big difference. Anyway, that's my can't let it go. So keep an eye on that story. I don't think we'll see them erecting many temporary stadiums in New York again.
And just quickly, Menners, do we know when the domestic fixture's coming out, the rest of the domestic fixture?
I know. I can imagine the listeners were thinking that. Like, when will we get the Sheffield Shield fixtures?
Yeah.
Well, listeners, you'll just have to wait. You'll just have to wait on the edge of your seat as when the Sheffield Shield will begin. Like you, Damien, I'm not sure.
Hopefully so.
Yeah. Now tell me, Damien, where can the listeners catch up with you?
On Twitter at Damo_Watts.
Indeed. And shouldn't they leave a comment? You always say it. Go on, throw it in there. Yeah, please leave a comment.
If you have any feedback, anything, questions, happy to answer them. So feel free to leave a comment.
Indeed. It's winter here, so you throw us some topics. If there's something you want us to talk about, throw it our way. All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at @Menners. I also produce another show called Fairground Fuck Up. So go and download that true crime show. It's about accidents in amusement parks.
I shouldn't laugh.
It's a funny name. So check that one out. But thanks everybody for listening to Cricket Unfiltered, and we'll be back next week.